Hello class, this is Teresa Stack, and the next learning unit looks at job hazard analysis or job safety analysis. And the reason why it goes both ways with these terms is it depends on how you frame it. I do like to frame it as a JSA because it has a more positive spin on it than a JHA. But either way, you're doing pretty much the same task of identifying the hazards, or the task first that needs to be evaluated, breaking it down into steps, then looking at the potential hazards, evaluating the risk, putting control measures in place if they aren't there, and then communicating that to employees and to management. And so our objectives for this particular learning unit are for you to really understand what a JHA or a JSA is, as well as the different parts and how they interact with each other. And then for your homework, you're going to use JHA form to evaluate a task. And remember that there's other different methods out there that you can use to meet the same ends, although this one I'd have to say is by far the most popular. If you're in the world of occupational safety and health and you've never dealt with a job hazard or a job safety analysis, then you either haven't been there very long or your job isn't very robust. Because it's a technique that's used throughout every single industry, no matter what it's called or the level in which it's used. So by pure definition, it focuses on the jobs or the tasks. And this is really important because when we look at a HAZOP, that focuses on processes. And so when we're doing system safety, we need to look at what we're actually evaluating and what is the proper tool to use. And there's just so many tools out there. There's so many variations of the tools. And so our job hazard analysis focuses on the relationship between the worker, the task, the tools, and the environment. And that's because it is task or job specific. And then you just go through a structured form so that you can evaluate risk. First you find the hazards, then you evaluate risks, and you put some mediations in place. And there's a link right here to the OSHA website, and the OSHA website does a really good job of creating a user-level tool or booklet so that when you train other individuals on how to do this, you have the tools you need. So remember, the job hazard analysis or the job safety analysis, and this is so important, I can't stress it enough, it's not done by the safety person in their own box. It really should be done with the people who are exposed to the hazards, because nobody knows better than them what the solutions are to put into place, what the steps are, and what the risks are. So I've selected that link, and then I've brought myself to Appendix 2. And this is where I really like the document that OSHA put into place, because you might not think of different types of hazard categories. For example, corrosive chemicals versus flammable versus toxic. And so by using the appendix, it enables you to be sure that you're evaluating all the different types of hazards that are out there. And it also gives you an example or an explanation of what each one of these is. So for example, I'm an ergonomist by trade as well as a safety professional. I tend to keep my focus there. And sometimes I forget about the electrical hazards because they're dealt with by different safety and health individuals. And so this reminds me that I should take a look at those. And it also has this standardized form, which it looks pretty simple. And really it is pretty simple to implement. You have to put a lot of detail into it, but there's a pretty short learning curve when you look at the different elements that are important in a job hazard analysis. So when we take a look at our example here, the JSA is hitching tractor and wagon. You can see that we're trying to hitch a tractor or wagon to a tractor. And so the basic steps are broken down, and it's really better to break these down first and make sure that you get them right, and then go through and look at the different hazards. So we check that the position of the wheels is in place and that the tongue is in place, and then have the tractor driver back up to within a few inches of the tongue, and then we kind of move things around until we could drop that tractor trailer actually into place and position the pins so that we could throw the pins through the hole, and then we move the tractor and we make sure everything's locked down. And so simple steps, But this really helps to break it down into what are the hazards and what recommendations do we make, and maybe the recommendations are already in place. I mean, a lot of times what you find with a job hazard analysis is that you have the controls and people aren't necessarily using the controls, or they forgot to go back to the JSA. Really simple, easy to use, but pretty much invaluable in a workplace. I can't imagine a workplace is without job hazard or job safety analysis. And so our first step is just to identify what is the job or task that we're taking a look at. And usually when we think job, it's not a holistic job, a big job. It's usually just a small task that they're doing. Because we're trying to break this down into a sizable chunk, less than 15 steps. And sometimes even those steps have sub-steps. So when I worked for the Department of the Navy, we had a lot of job hazard analysis that were then classified by job code. So it was really neat that you could go through and pull up a job code and then pull up all the job hazard or job safety analysis associated with them. And then the company or the department, I mean, you know what company you work for, but sometimes there's various companies or various departments. For example, I'm currently employed by the Montana Department of Transportation, and we have 6 divisions, and so here we would change our department to division. And then you can look at how different entities, so Division 1 versus Division 5, do it differently or they do it the same. And then who took a look at this and who approved it. Now remember, even if you're the person who's helping to analyze, you should not be the main individual who's involved in creating these job hazard analysis, because nobody knows the job better than the worker who is performing their job. And therefore, it's usually first line supervisor and a seasoned worker who's helping with the job hazard analysis. And you're just there to guide them. So this is actually a unit that's commonly trained by safety and health professionals. And this all fits into our system safety realm. We're breaking it down, so we're not looking at processes, we're not looking at systems, we're looking at jobs that support the system. And injuries that can occur to the individual who's supporting the system, or maybe even failures that can occur and cause the system to not operate as efficiently as it should. So here we have another example, and I like this example because we've all done this before, whether it's at our home or in a professional setting. And so when we look at the steps, you see how these actions or verbs are action verbs, right? So we don't have a word in there like carefully. We have words in there like the person is doing something. The action is to fill or filling, to pour or pouring, to place or placing, to add or adding. And then the hazards are associated with, again, action verbs, breaking, scalding, spilling, and laceration. And so we try to take the personal adverbs out of here and we put them in very explicit terms. And so this one actually has it broken down 3 different kinds of control levels: elimination, substitution, and PPE. And some of them you can see are pretty not likely that people would follow them. I mean, what's the likelihood that somebody's going to wear gloves when they're filling a carafe? Instead, maybe they'd use a metal carafe, or that they'd have a waterline marker. Either way, any of these can work, but sometimes if you use this tiered approach to your control measures, then when you're debriefing management, they can choose which one works the best. So you may believe that people won't wear gloves, but if management wants them to, then you have that in there. And so our steps is we really want to be able to break this down into 3 to 15 steps. And if there's more than that, then there's probably subtasks that need to be analyzed. And you can break it down into major categories and then go back into minor categories as subcategories. And remember, right, you are not the person doing this on your own. You may watch and make some recommendations and become very knowledgeable, but you want the responsibility to be pushed back to the supervisor or the workers. And that's not only because they know the job better than you do, it's because then they have ownership. Again, don't use adverbs like carefully, and make sure you have action verbs that begin each and every statement or category. So the potential hazards category, this describes event or exposures that might occur. and I'll say it again because it's really important. You may see this again on an exam. The potential hazards describes events or exposures that might occur. And even though I've been in the field for 26 years, and I don't say that to embark any kind of bragging rights, there are things that I may forget because I don't encounter them all that often, or especially if you're in a more consultant type job where you look at a variety of different industries, you may just forget something's out there. So, for example, I don't always think of biologics and viruses when I think about health hazards that are in this biological category. So having this reminder checklist, as you see down here, helps me to remember that those are out there: fungi, viruses, parasites. And it's just personally, primarily, my job roles have been in manufacturing and in inside environments. So if we flip this, and you've usually been in an outside environment, now you're in an inside environment, you might miss something that occurs quite readily in that particular industry. And so some statements that might be out there that look at our hazard events, right? So this is something that's occurring. You know, the worker could be struck by, they could be caught between, they can fall from or to, or they exert effort when. An example of these, you can kind of fill in the blank. It depends on what type of job you're doing. But it helps you get through that critical area, which is this column number 2. What are these potential hazards? And so list these without the controls and then go back and put the controls in. Otherwise, you might miss something that is happening or occurring because somebody actually forgets to wear their personal protective equipment, and then the noise is at an unacceptable level, right? So high noise, we would not want to undercategorize that because people are wearing their personal protective equipment. We'll deal with that later when we talk about the controls that are put into place. And so some examples of our controls is we have to think proactively. Either what are the worker doing, what are the workers doing, or what should the workers be doing? And try to use your personal protective equipment and your administrative controls lastly. And although it may be important that workers have training, and that goes in there because they need to be refreshed or they don't know how to use a piece of personal equipment, a piece of personal protective equipment, or a piece of mechanical equipment, those are our last lines of defenses. So we can't say that the worker must be careful. If we were going to say that, there's really no need to do a job hazard analysis. We just say this all the time. So our hierarchy of controls as safety and health professionals, you definitely don't need to take a look at this. But just remember, as we go to the bottom of our triangle, personal protective equipment is the least effective because it does nothing to reduce the hazard. The hazard is still there. We sometimes can affect the risk, the probability of being injured, but it doesn't affect the hazard. And administrative controls, I really don't know why they sit on their own, only because they have to be used in conjunction with engineering controls, or the engineering controls won't work very well on their own. And so we have elimination, and that's where we remove the hazard. That's always the best one. Then people don't have to make a decision. Then there's substitution for something that's less hazardous. And engineering controls, such as putting barricades or blockers in place. And always at the end is our personal protective equipment. So when I train, I always, if I'm able to do it, and to do it in a funny way, I'll come in my safety gear, my hard hat, my safety vest, my clean gloves, my safety glasses, and say, this is what you think of when you think of a safety professional. But by far, this is one of the last things that we really want to do. Instead, we want to engineer out the hazards. So we kind of want to break this stigma that the hard hat is the catch-all for all things that go wrong. So we're circling back again, and we're taking a look at those hazards and ways to prevent them. And we're going back to the HAD and 10. And so if we take off the last two of the HAD and 10, because that's recovery and taking care of the injured, then we could look at different ways in which we could prevent the hazard from occurring itself or prevent the marshaling of energy, right? So just don't do it. Do not construct buildings that are up tall. Do not go up so high. Now we know we can't really do that, so let's just do less. Let's only have people go up to 3 feet instead of 15 feet, if possible, on the outside of the building. Maybe it's that HVAC system goes in the basement and you advocate for that. Now, I know there's other issues associated with it, such as confined space, but we definitely took care of the fall from heights issue. And then prevent the release. So how can we stop the hazard from coming out and affecting us in our work environment? And then again, Haddon's energy theory, our event or our countermeasures, can we slow this release, separate by time or space, or separate by some kind of barrier that's put into place? And then training, or again, personal protective equipment, or all sorts of things can strengthen that work zone so that people are less likely to be injured if the equipment fails. And we're trying to take this tiered approach. So not one solution is the best solution. We put lots of things in place to prevent people from being injured. So for our administrative controls, they're weak in respects that you have to trust people to follow the rules. Although people do a pretty decent job of following the rules if you can help them do so and not put extra barriers in place. So safe work practices, OSHA sees them as the main aim of reducing exposure to the hazards. And that measures are an additional relief to workers. So things like exercise break and work rotation can help bring down their exposure. But they're really, again, not doing much to eliminate the hazard. So they're good in conjunction with engineering controls and in conjunction with personal protective equipment, but they don't always stand so well on their own. And so our last area to look at is who's going to review the job hazard analysis, and who's going to create the job hazard analysis. When will there be subsequent reviews? And in many places where I worked, this would be after an incident because we thought there might be a weakness in our JHA that created that incident. And then is there a standard of work or a standard operating procedure that goes in conjunction with JSA? Sorry about that. Macs are finicky sometimes. So different ways in which we could review or use the job hazard analysis. We can use it for training, just to show what the hazards are and how we can put solutions into place, or playing a video of the task and having a bunch of workers speak up about what they see the hazards are or how they actually do the job as opposed to how it's written in the standard of work. And a lot of times they're different. And so we can use them for safety training as well as on-the-job training. A lot of times they're used for post-accident review or as a starting point when we have new processes that are put into place and we need to compare them with our old job hazard analysis.
Welcome back to World of Mechanics. Have you ever guys wonder what happens if you jump start your vehicle, instead of the positive you put the negative and you switch them? Well, today we're going to demonstrate. It happened to us accidentally. Sometimes it happens, guys, you're in a hurry, you don't pay attention, and you think you kill the computer. So stay with us to see how we're going to do that and how we're going to fix the vehicle after that. Okay, watch now. When we switch them, this is positive and we're going to give it negative, and the other way around, and you're going to see the spark coming out of it. Okay, like that. Okay, so now if you go ahead and try to start your vehicle, you will not be able to. As you can see, I turn the key on and nothing happens. You don't even see what gear it is. It's like you don't have connection to the computer anymore, to the transmission computer and to the engine ECU as well. Some cars it's one computer, and you cannot even pull the keys on some of the cars because it has no connection with the transmission, so it doesn't know if you're in park or not. Okay guys, so what you need to do, don't worry, most of the time she didn't burn the ECU, right here it is. In some cases you might, but probably you'll be 95% you're safe. You need to find the fuses that are in your engine compartment, and this is a Fiat, but it's the same for all the vehicles.
Okay, so kind of funny, but could absolutely happen. And I've had my kids jump cars before, and they were always, well, ask me which one do we do first? Do we put it on the dead car first, or do we put it on the live car first? And definitely when you show somebody a video, they kind of get it more so than when they do it themselves, because I don't think I would have cross-jumped my car. You can actually have really bad things happen when you do that. But again, there's just an example. You open the hood, you check the battery terminal, you check the vent caps, and then you kind of go forward from there. And so this hazard control column will tell you about the administrative controls that you should put into place. And although a really low-level administrative control is to read the directions, maybe that tells you that if you have people who are of different nationality or who may take the time to read the directions, then you need to have a simple graphic that shows them how to do their job. And so you can uncover a lot of this from your job hazard analysis. So the different types of controls you put into place. And pictures and diagrams are great controls to put into place, because a lot of times people don't take the time to read the words, or they're in a rush, or certainly if it's minus 25 because you're in Montana or someplace else and you're trying to jump your car, you may not take the time that you actually need. And so at the end of the day, a job hazard analysis identifies and analyzes hazards associated with the performance of various jobs or tasks. And the goal is to make the worker as safe as possible. So when we make the worker safe, then we're protecting our system, right? They're like one of these elements that feed into our system. There's only three main parts, and that's breaking it down into steps, identifying the hazards, and then putting the controls into place. Not only can we use this for hazard control before or after an incident, but we really can use it for on-the-job training or safety training. And it is definitely used in accident investigation. You could pull out your JSA and figure out how people deviated from the process, and maybe that's how they were injured. And so thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have a great day.